Okay, so the BC Conservatives are opposing a bill that fast tracks resource development. It's weird. I know. Like, what timeline is this? This is a resource development project we're talking about here. It is literally the Conservatives' wet dream. You've got a bill here that could give the provincial governments the power to bypass environmental assessments, overrule local governments, and fast track approvals for projects. You would think the Conservatives would be all in on this. You would think they would support this. It is even more interesting that the BC Greens and First Nations agree with the Conservatives on their opposition to this legislation. That's even weirder, isn't it? Like, when have you ever seen the Greens and the Conservatives agree on anything? So let's talk about this bill C-15, also known as the Infrastructure Projects Act. There's been a lot of controversy about this bill here in BC. It is important to talk about this now because, as a country, we're entering a period where we must develop infrastructure in order to grow our economy, especially now that the US is shutting its borders to trade, right? We must break down interprovincial trade barriers. We must get our products to other markets, and we must build. Build, baby, build. That's Mark Carney's agenda, right? You're not building shit if it continues to take like 10 years to get approvals for projects. So this bill targets that. The Infrastructure Projects Act in British Columbia aims to speed up the approval process for things like hospitals, schools, bridges, and critical mineral mines, as long as they are projects of provincial significance. Some critics have argued that the bill allows the provincial government to override local zoning bylaws and fast-track infrastructure projects without requiring approval from municipal governments. I happen to think Pierre Poilievre had a great idea that might have solved this problem, to be fair. Poilievre spoke a lot about shovel-ready zones on the campaign trail. Shovel-ready zones are essentially areas that are pre-approved for major projects. The idea is to reduce red tape and get projects moving. Here's another criticism of Bill C-15 that I've seen. Indigenous leaders argue that the bill sidesteps consultation obligations under the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and raises fears that First Nations rights would be ignored in the rush to approve projects. Now, to be fair, Premier David Eby has said that projects will still require consultation with First Nations to align with the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. So everybody's popping off on this bill C-15. Environmental critics worry that the bill streamlines environmental assessments, potentially allowing projects to proceed without adequate scrutiny. It shouldn't surprise you that the BC Greens have said they will not support this bill. The Conservatives' major issue with this bill is really in the details. The bill grants the provincial cabinet authority to designate projects as provincially significant, as I told you earlier. Some people fear it could lead to unchecked decision-making, basically allowing the BC government to pick and choose winners based on politics, favoritism, and NDP insider connections. That's the way the BC Conservative leader, John Rostad, sees it. Now, to be fair, I think the Conservatives are making it look like there will be no checks whatsoever, and the NDP can just pick a pet project and slap a label of provincially significant on it and be on their merry way. The truth is, if a project designation is challenged, affected parties can still seek judicial review, which will allow the courts to intervene if the government oversteps its authority. Kinder Morgan had this problem with the TMX pipeline, right? They chose to sell the pipeline to the federal government because the courts overturned their approval because of challenges from Indigenous people. Look, David Eby and the NDP can force this bill through. They hold a slim majority. They would need the Speaker of the House to cast a tie-breaking vote, but they can force it through if they really wanted to. Here's how Premier David Eby responded to the criticism around this bill. Regarding the designation of provincially significant projects, he said provincially significant projects will be obvious to British Columbians and include clean electricity. It will address climate change, critical minerals, schools, and hospitals, and they will all require full Indigenous support. He goes on to say these are all huge and critical projects for our province, and it helps us grow our economy at the same time as we're facing threats from the United States. The reporter from North Shore News asked the premier whether he'd feel comfortable with future premiers from other parties, perhaps including John Rostad, having access to the same sweeping powers for cabinet to fast-track projects. To this, David Eby responded, incoming governments will write their own laws and will take their own actions. I can't govern the province that way. All I can do is listen to what people are saying to me, which is we want to grow the provincial economy. We want you to ensure we have good, high quality services, and we want you to do it yesterday. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. And that is really the message that came out of the federal election we just had, right? We want this country to get moving. Now, look, this is really part of the problem we have in this country, right? This is kind of a symptom of our democracy, if you like. There are so many interests at the table, and cutting red tape turns into cutting some people's interests. But finding a consensus at the table where you have conflicts of interest can take time, right? And there are groups that will never be on the same page. For example, on the national level, you could argue Quebec and Alberta may never be on the same page about pipelines across Canada. And this is how we arrive at situations where project approvals take 10 years, as we've seen with large infrastructure projects in the past. I think we're seeing it now. The intention of this bill by the NDP was actually good. It is in keeping with the objectives of the federal government to fast track projects of national interest in a time of economic crisis. So they're just trying to do what we asked them to do. They're just trying to do what we asked them to do. And that is the balance that Mark Carney and the federal government will have to strike if they will make any progress on the large nation building projects that they have been proposing. Good luck, you guys. Good luck. Good luck. Right? I hope you succeed. Peace. See you guys later.